The G7 took the rare step of global coordination to sell the yen. The yen was weaker for the last 2 days. Today, it seems to be coming back just a little bit firmer against the euro, holding on against the dollar. When and how do we know that the central banks are in the market?
Well, you basically have two opposing forces working. One is the speculative upward pressure on the yen, perhaps in anticipation of some of those repatriation flows. And then, of course, officials have drawn the line in the sand, so to speak, to prevent further appreciation. I think this kind of mixed environment and volatile environment for the yen is likely to prevail for at least several months. But I do think we won't see a significant yen strength from current levels.
You talked about a kind of line in the sand. What is that demarcation line? Is it 80 for dollar yen?
It's probably around 80 dollar yen, just being a psychological level. Again, I think we haven't seen any signs of intervention today, but certainly if we were to dip down below this dollar yen 80 level, I think would see increased signs. Maybe not so much from other central banks, but from the Bank of Japan and the finance ministry there.
Should we be looking at other pairs, not just dollar yen or euro yen, to look for signs that the central banks are involved?
Well, I think dollar yen and euro yen are the sort of the primary targets here. We know the Bank of England intervened. We also know the Bank of Canada intervened. But again, judging from the degree of movements in the markets, those interventions may have been relatively small. So again, I think the Bank of Japan is really taking the lead, but with international support and international backing.
Okay, international support here is key. Does the coordinated selling of yen hurt the finances of the U.S. or of any other country that does take part?
Again, I don't think it does at this point. For Japan, it was really important to get this international backing. They intervened back in September with, I would say, relatively limited success. I think it just sent a so much stronger message from the point of view of, how committed the authorities are. I don't think it's in the interest of Japan's trading partners to see necessarily a significantly weaker yen. That's why I think, we're not going to see necessarily very strong amount of participation internationally.
Okay, and one reason a lot of people have said we see the difference between euro yen and dollar yen's move is because of expectations that the European Central Bank will soon raise interest rates. We have euro dollar at about a 5-month high of 142. How many interest rate increases are priced in at this point?
Well, the markets are pricing in more than 100 basis points of interest rate hikes in Europe over the next 12 months. So it's quite a significant pricing in. So you could actually argue that there's still some space for the euro to reflect that. Now, that being said, the problem is still the skeleton in the closet, and that's all the European debt concerns. The markets have pretty much ignored that for now, but we don't think that's going to be the case forever. And those concerns have certainly not gone away. Yeah,
you keep hearing talk about perhaps another bailout, maybe for Portugal. At what point does that start to overcome what's happening in terms of intervention?
Well, in terms of Portugal, for example, April is a very significant month in terms of refinancing from the Portuguese government. So that could be a trigger point where the foreign exchange markets comes more into line with the fixed income markets, because also, let's take note of the fact that if we look at the Portuguese bond markets, they're still showing a significant amount of stress. It's just that the foreign exchange markets have really not paid that much attention to it up until now.
Okay. Meantime, we got to talk about quantitative easing, the Fed's bond buying program, which is scheduled to end at the end of June. What does that mean for the dollar until then?
Again, I think until then, the dollar was going to be on the defensive, and the kind of hawkish signals that we've heard from the European Central Bank, but also from the Bank of England, and especially with today's UK CPI data, for example, that's going to keep the dollar on the defensive. But I think come June, it's going to be an important threshold for the currency market. The transition from easing to neutral policy is going to be significant in itself, even if the Fed doesn't actually start hiking rates quickly.
Okay, so watch the end of June as a potential turning point in currencies. Thank you so much.